Hello and welcome to week 4 of our course, Surviving to Thriving After a Brain Injury. I am Michelle Munt, and congratulations, because you are 1 month into this, you're nearly there. I hope you have learned lots so far, and more importantly, I really hope that you are putting into practice the things that we've learned so far. So let's start with a quick review of what we covered last week. We talked about our perceptions, how they've been created, in regards to the fact they've come from things that we've heard, seen, been through, and then we talked at how we can rewrite our brains using self-suggestion, right? So where we can actually start telling our brains a new perception that we want to take as our default setting. And in this process, we said it's important to acknowledge that in order for us to have the opportunity to change our self-perceptions, we needed to be able to build up these new references for our brains to go back to. And to help you do that, you hopefully have at least started, if not finished, creating a mood board showing what you are aiming for your life to be like, so that you can use it as a visual reminder to help you develop more of these references. Okay, so there are a number of unhelpful thinking patterns that I think it's really useful if we identify what they are, so that we're able to recognize what is happening when we do them. And that's really important, because once you're able to recognize it, you are able to start challenging it, right, for being unhelpful. And that means you're able to police them better. So if you're able to police them, right, that is part of how you are going to build up references, new references for how you want your brain to behave when these unhelpful thinking patterns happen. Okay, so whereas sometimes these patterns might be happening and then you're just getting sucked into them, and therefore you're feeling like you're having to accept them as the only way to look at the situation. If we can start training your brain to start challenging that and to start looking at alternatives, then that's how we can make these patterns happen less often. And then even when they do happen, that you're not going to get sucked into them. That, yes, all right, they'll pop into your head maybe, but you will be versed in challenging them quickly, so you don't have to take them to heart so much. Okay, so let's go through what some of these patterns are, how to recognize them, examples of them. So the first one is predicting the future, and essentially this is kind of where anxiety lives, because we can find ourselves feeling really anxious when we're spending time trying to predict what the future is going to be and what could go wrong, right? Rather than us just letting it be. And actually, in the end, most of our predictions don't come true. And so all that we've done, say we were worrying about it for, I don't know, a couple of hours, all night, whatever. All that's happened is you've wasted that time, that energy on that worry and being upset rather than um, enjoying time with your friends and family or getting some well needed sleep, right? Because when we're worried, that keeps us awake quite often. And you don't need to go through this because none of us can predict the future, and there's no reason for us to assume that the worst possible outcome is the outcome that's going to happen, right? So, an example of this is so you have a job interview or that you want to ask someone out on a date, right? You just assume it's going to go badly. So you feel like you're going to get rejected immediately. And so that might even stop you from entering those situations. You might not go to that interview. You might cancel that interview and decide never to talk to that person about going out for a drink, right? Because you're so busy being worried and anxious about what could happen. And actually, again, both of those are worst case scenarios, and therefore, what you need to do is start imagining what it'll be like when you start seeing in the interviewer's face that they're really bought into what you're saying. Perhaps you're even connecting on a more personal level, or how it'll feel when that person that you've been wanting to ask out says, "Yeah, sure. When's a good time for you?" Right? Now, this is one that I talk about a lot, mind reading. And this is where we tend to assume that we know what someone else is thinking about us or about a thing, and often we don't really have any evidence of this. This is where we might just be thinking, oh, but they think I'm such an idiot, right? Um, Whether that's that you deduced it from the look on someone's face, or that you just felt that that's what other people would be like, or your boss thinks you're stupid and your work colleague is ignoring you, but actually all that's happening is that person has something else on their mind, right? We don't know what is happening in someone else's life. So just because someone's behavior, their expressions, or the way that they are responding to you, it doesn't always mean that it's about you. It can be that they have some kind of stresses happening in their life, and so right now isn't a great time for them, right? And so they're not as maybe as warm or excitable as you're used to seeing them. That doesn't mean to say that it's you who's draining their energy. It's much more likely that it's something they're worried about in their lives that is draining their energy that they don't necessarily want to talk about at the moment, right? And that's okay. We all have the right to choose when we talk about things. So remember, next time you find yourself assuming that somebody's thinking the worst of you, tell yourself off for it. Unless that person has directly said it to you, you have absolutely no evidence for it, right? So the next one is where we tend to blow things out of proportion, right? And again, this happens a lot when we're anxious. We start to catastrophize things. It can be something that, yes, it's worrying you, but actually it's a relatively small problem, but you have managed to make it feel like it's virtually the end of the world, right? So, an example of this, especially since we're in a world of social media, is assuming that someone, is thinking really badly of you because they haven't replied to your text or your email or Snapchat or whatever services you use. They haven't done it really quickly. They haven't done it within like 10 seconds. And you're taking that to heart. You're really feeling that, oh gosh, well they usually answer like straight away. Oh my gosh, that must mean that they don't want to talk to me and they hate me at the moment. I wonder what I've done wrong, right? The chances are that person hasn't seen it. They're too busy. They're on the phone. They're at work. So actually what you need to do is start to calm it down, not allow it to just automatically be this assumption. Or you might find that you're worried because yes, you've made a some kind of mistake at work, and therefore you're assuming that means that you're going to be fired for it. And actually, that's not how things work at all, is it? Yes, we all make mistakes. So just because you've made a mistake, that doesn't mean that you're going to lose your job. I'm sure that then somebody will want to ask you about it to make sure that the mistake gets corrected and it doesn't happen again in the future, whether there's different steps that as a company you need to take rather than just use an individual. Who knows? But it doesn't, especially if it's only something small, right? It doesn't mean that you're going to lose your job. It just means it's a learning curve for you, for the company, for your colleagues, whatever, you know? So the next one is about focusing on the negatives. So we quite often, if we're feeling anxious, we can find that that anxiety grows and is more fed by a kind of tunnel vision that we can get, where we can't see anything else other than this really bad version of what could be happening, what could be going on, what the outcome can be, rather than the idea of being able to accept that there's more than one version of how anything can play out, right? And what we can find is that one thing that we're worried about, it can then start to colour everything as negative. So you'll find that you might do something such as there's a person that, alright, they don't like you. And let's be honest, we are all individuals and not everybody likes everybody. And that is universal. That's always going to be the case, right? But then what you might find is you're focusing on the fact that this person doesn't really want to be friends with you, and all of a sudden that's killing your confidence, right? And you are allowing it to create this idea that actually, that's huge and that's really important, that they don't like you, when in fact you've got loads of other friends and that is more important. Yeah. Whether you've got one other friend or you've got 100 other friends, whatever, that's the important thing, not the person who doesn't like you. Okay, so try not to focus on the negatives, try to allow your vision to open up and start seeing that, okay, that might be a negative, but there are plenty of other positives around it as well. And overgeneralizing. So this happens, in fact, we do this quite a lot, right? This is where you might have been through a circumstance, or you just feel like you assume that things are going to happen and follow a particular pattern, right? So this could be that you say you're going to a new a new group, right? New group support, and that first day you're new and you struggle to get into any meaningful conversations with anybody, right? Because perhaps they already know each other and they're already having conversations, and you're kind of not feeling that outgoing yet. And then you think, well, I'm not going to go again because I'm not going to make any friends because they haven't really spoken to me very much. And I was just the lemon sat in the corner, right? That's an overgeneralization, because just because it happened once, it doesn't mean to say it's going to happen every single time. Or another example is saying that just because one former partner cheated on you, or let you down in some way, that you're then saying that gender, all men, all women are bad, right? Because this one person let you down. You're writing off the other 3.5 billion people of that gender, right? Oh, that is how crazy it is. So try and catch yourself when you're doing this, when you're overgeneralizing, and give circumstances, new things, a chance. Just because it's happened once before, it's not guaranteed that it's going to happen badly like that again. And then we have imagining the worst case scenario. So this will be where we're thinking of something that's going to happen, and we are absolutely convinced that it's going to be worst case scenario, even though we have examples that have been successful at this in the past, right? So it could be that you've been asked to give a presentation and you're thinking, I'm going to mess it up, right? Even though plenty of other times you've done well, and in fact that's why they're asking you to do it again, because you did so well, right? So what you need to do is, when this is happening, is accept that you were successful at it before, accept those positive memories, right? to be able to get past this worry of worst case scenario. Okay, because the chances are worst case scenario is not going to happen. Whether it will be as successful as it's been before, who knows? But there's no reason, right, to assume the worst is going to happen. Ever. And labelling. So this one's quite big, and for me this was quite difficult. So there are times when we label our behaviour in certain situations, and then what happens is we're actually defining ourselves as that one specific behaviour. So whether that's anxiety, and we fail to even consider or recognise that there are other possible characterizations and outcomes there, right? So this is saying something like, oh, I'm always anxious, or I'm not good enough. When in fact, yes, there are times you're anxious, right? But that is highly unlikely to be 100% of the time. Because if it is, you would be having a nervous breakdown by now and probably would have been sectioned and ended up in a hospital to help you, right? In all honesty. And this thought of I'm not good enough. We all have talents, and we all have things that we haven't learnt yet, or things that are not our strengths, okay? But that doesn't mean for 1 second that you're not good enough, right? We are human beings. We have the ability to learn. We have the ability to progress. And if there is something that you have identified that is never going to be your talent or your passion, then what you need to do is reframe that and focus on the things that are your talent, your passion, right? We're not designed to do everything. That's why people excel in some things and not in others, right? So, and forgive me, I've only got a rather old example for you. There was a very successful Formula One racing driver called Jackie Stewart. He was Scottish, and he was exceptionally good at what he did. Right, he became world champion, but because he grew up in a time before dyslexia had been recognised as a condition, and therefore he had some reading and learning difficulties. He went through his childhood feeling like a failure. And yet this man went on to be a world champion, very famous and very successful, a millionaire, right? So just because of his reading and writing at that stage was seen as below average for his age group, okay, because dyslexia at that stage hadn't been even recognised as a thing, right? So it was just that he was not intelligent enough, right? That's what he was labelled as. But just because of that, that did not mean that it had to hold him back for the rest of his life, because he went on to be an extremely successful person. And then later in life, after he'd retired, he ended up building his own team, right? Which is incredible, and employing loads of people, loads of engineers, with degrees, things that he never had. But because he was so successful at what he did, that's how it ended up for him. Okay? So, the homework I want you to work on this week is I want you to start writing down some examples of where you are doing some of these unhelpful behaviours. Okay, you may not have an example for every single one, and that is absolutely fine, or you might have several examples for them. But what I want you to be able to do is then think about what you're going to do when these types of thoughts start happening. What are you going to tell yourself? Okay, so you need to put these down as the responses to the examples. What examples can you give yourself to disprove these ideas when they pop into your mind, right? So, previous experiences, things people have said to you, what sort of things are you going to be able to use as a retort to these thoughts? And think about who can help remind you of your talents and good examples. So, whether that's your husband or wife, whether that's a parent, whether that's your best friend, your next door neighbour, your teacher, someone who has seen a lot of these things, who go, oh yes, there was that time when you did XYZ and it was brilliant, right? Whether it was that you had great map reading skills and helped stop the group from getting lost, right? Just a thought, something that you might have buried to the back of your mind but really impressed them at the time, that they can remind you of. You may find that you don't have all of these types of unhelpful thoughts, and that is absolutely fine. Or you've got loads of examples for one particular type, and that's also absolutely fine. Just write down everything that comes to you. And again, I want you to put this somewhere that you're going to quite regularly see it, so something like your fridge, because I want you to be able to remind yourself of what these little comebacks are going to be, so that as these unhelpful thoughts approach you, you have the opportunity to quite quickly shut them down with these more positive responses. Okay, so that draws week 4 to a close. Thank you so much for joining me. I really hope that you are able to spend quite a lot of time delving in quite deep into your thought patterns, and make sure that you've got some really good examples of how to overcome them. And again, do ask other people. There's no need to struggle with this exercise on your own. Okay? All right, take care, and I shall see you in week 5. Bye.